Hello BookTube, welcome back to my 2025 library tour. In this episode, a new bookcase. But still, classics, canonical, modern, and contemporary fiction, poetry, and drama. Although with tomorrow's episode, I will be finished with classics, canonical, modern, and contemporary fiction, poetry, and drama. And then it will be on to history after a brief break. So let's get started with this shelf. First up is the collected poems of James Merrill. James Merrill was a major American poet of the mid-20th century and later parts of the 20th century. This is the second time I've had this collection in my library. I had this collection about 20 years ago and read it, and at the time really enjoyed it, although my subsequent attempt to reread it this past year was not successful, which is something that I've discovered with a number of early and late 20th century American poets. I'm not getting on with them as much as I would like to. Sticking with poetry for a little bit, this is the Go-Go Boy Sonnets by Edmund Miller. This is a collection of sonnets that extols the beauty and attractiveness and virtues of various go-go boys in the 80s, 90s, and very early 2000s. Some of the boys are not native English speakers, and so Miller either translates the poems into the young men's native languages or has them translated for him. I've had this collection for a little over 20 years now. The next two books are by Yukio Mishima. Acts of Worship, which is a collection of short stories that I've had for a number of decades now. I've had this since I was in high school, so well over 20 years. When I read it in high school, I struggled with some of the stories. Some of them I liked, some of them I didn't. But in a recent reread attempt a few years ago, I didn't get on with any of them, annoyingly. But that is something that I am experiencing. That a lot of my attempts to reread are not going as well as I would like. Unless it's manga. Also by Yukio Mishima is The Temple of the Golden Pavilion, which I acquired a year or two ago, or maybe 3, from a book depository before it shut down. Have not gotten to it though. Next is Into by North Morgan. This is a contemporary gay novel about a young man who gets involved in the gay scene in Los Angeles while maybe trying to work. It's not very good. Next is another collection of poetry, Please Make Me Pretty, I Don't Want to Die by Tawanda Molalu. This is from the Princeton series of contemporary poets from Princeton University Press. This is a collection I'm not terribly fond of. Next is The Moons of Jupiter by Alice Munro. So as I mentioned several times already in this tour, a few years ago Criminally came up with an idea for a booktube event. Participants would read books published in the year of their birth. I selected 4, 2 novels and 2 short story collections. None of them worked for me. One of these short story collections is The Moons of Jupiter, and much like Cathedral by Raymond Carver. This collection stinks as well. Back to poetry with Subhuman Redneck Poems by Les Murray. Les Murray was an Australian poet. I think he's probably one of the major Australian poets. And this is a very fine collection. I really enjoyed it when I read it last April for Aussie April. Next is Mama Day by Gloria Naylor. This is a novel set on the coast of the Carolinas or Georgia, and it's about a young woman who returns to her hometown where she gets involved in some shenanigans. There's quite a bit of magical realism in this novel, as the main character's great grandmother has magical abilities and magical knowledge, and there are other people in this community who has similar knowledge as well. It's been a very long time since I read this novel. I know I read it when I was in high school. I don't know if I ever reread it, but I got rid of it and I wanted to add it back into my collection, so I did so. Although I still haven't gotten around to rereading it. And given my Trek record, anyway, this is Night Journey by Maria Negroni, translated by Anne Twitty. This is part of the Lockhart Library of Poetry and Translation series from Princeton University Press, and it's quite good. Next is These Violent Delights by Micah Nemerover. This is a novel about two young men set in the 1970s Pittsburgh, although the story itself is inspired by the Leopold and Loeb case from the 1920s. These two young men meet in college, fall in love, and end up going on something of a rampage. I made it about 100 or so pages in before I gave up, and I have not given it a Bill redemption shot, even though I keep meaning to. Not entirely sure if Nemerover has any other works out. Back to big collected poetry collections. This is the collected poems of Frank O'Hara. I had this collection about 20 years ago and read it, and at the time quite liked it, but when I revisited this collection last year, I didn't have as much success as I would have liked. The poems didn't really connect with me as much. Long Day's Journey into Night by Eugene O'Neill. So this is one of O'Neill's major plays. It's about a businessman, or is it a playwright? No, he's an actor. It's about an actor who's very set in his ways. He's very conservative in many ways. And he's having some issues with his sons. One of whom is quite ill and is based on Eugene O'Neill himself. And the other is a bit of a ne'er-do-well. And the play's just a few hours in this family's life. I didn't quite see what the hype was all about. Didn't really get on with this play. It's okay, but nothing to really... Next is Glitter Road by January Gill O'Neill. This is a collection of poems from Kevin Carey Press, which is distributed by the University of Chicago Press, and it's a quite good collection. I really enjoyed it. Next is Gutter Boys by Alvin Orloff. This is a gay novel set in the 1970s that I do not remember much about. It's been quite a while since I tried to read it, and I didn't like it much. This is The Book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ozeki. It won the Women's Prize 2 years ago. It's about a young boy who is trying to come to terms with his father's death, and he begins to have conversations with various inanimate objects. I've tried to get into this novel several times and have failed each time. The next two books are by Orhan Pamuk, who won the Nobel Prize in Literature back in the early 2000s. First is The Black Book. This is the story of a Turkish lawyer in Istanbul trying to find his missing wife and cousin, who he believes has run off with his wife. And so most of the novel is in part sort of this family history, and in other parts journey through Istanbul and its magnificent weirdness. I had this book many years ago, about 20. Didn't quite get on with it at the time. I think I bailed within a chapter or two. Came back 2 years ago, or will be 2 years ago in December. And I successfully managed to read it then. And I rather liked it, except the ending is not very good. I also have My Name is Red by Orhan Pamuk. This is a historical novel set during the 17th century, 16th or 17th century, and it's about miniaturists in the court of the Sultan. I've tried to get into this a few times and just haven't been able to. Maybe I will. Next is Love in the Big City by Sang-Young Park, translated from the Korean by Anton Her. This is a Korean gay novel about a young man who has a number of relationships. The novel, in a way, is a bit more of a collection of longer short stories that may or may not necessarily come together. I liked the novel, but I didn't really love it. Next is more poetry. This is the selected poems of Giovanni Pasquoli, translated by Taiji Silverman with Marina Della Puta Johnston. I rather like this collection. And it's from the Lockhart Library of Translation from Princeton University Press. This is Within the Sweet Noise of Life by Sandro Penna, translated from the Italian by Alexander Booth. This is a very short collection of gay Italian poetry out from Siegel, which is distributed here in the U.S. by the University of Chicago Press. I really, really like this collection. It is really good. And then I have a Mott from Unincorporated Territory by Craig Santos Perez. This one, I think the Pulitzer Prize last year. Or is it the National Book Award? One of the two. I liked it, but it's not one that I will frequently revisit. And is out by Omnidon, which is distributed by the University of Chicago Press. Our Men in Iraq by Robert Perisic, translated by Will Firth. It's Croatian. So this is a novel set during the Iraq War. The main character is a journalist who gets his cousin a job as a correspondent in Baghdad, and his reports are apparently insane. I did not make it too far into this novel before I build on it, and I'm not entirely sure I will ever give it a Bill redemption. Next is Kajiki, translated by Donald L. Philippi, and is out from the University of Tokyo Press. I think this is a very, very early work of Japanese literature that I have not gotten around to yet. I really need to. The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym from Nantucket by Edgar Allan Poe. So this is Poe's lone novel. It's about a group of young men who basically go on a journey around the world and ultimately end up in some very fantastical adventures. The novel was unfinished. So it ends on a very interesting cliffhanger. It has been a very, very long time since I read it, and I have never gotten around to rereading it. What I'd Rather Not Think About by Yinta Postuma, translated by Sarah Timmer Harvey. It was shortlisted for the International Booker last year. This is the novel about a pair of twins, one of whom is the narrator, and the other one is a very, well, I mean, they're both weird, but the male twin is significantly weirder than his sister, who eventually, I think, commits suicide, if I remember. And I read the novel. I'm surprised that I managed to, although maybe under the circumstances it was maybe not as surprising. But it's a case of it's okay. I might reread it. I doubt a reread attempt will be all that successful. So it's just okay. Next is Brief Homage to Pluto and Other Poems by Fabio Pasterler, translated by Will Schutt. This is a really good collection. I really, really like this collection. There are a lot of fabulous poems in here. The next two books are by Kirsten Valdez Quaid. First is her debut, Night at the Fiestas short story collection, which I first had a go at, I think in 2016, or maybe 2015. No, 2016. So I just discovered BookTube, and Simon Savage of Savage Reads mentioned try a story tag, maybe it was another booktuber. And I thought that was a really cool idea. So I checked out a number of short story collections from a local library, tried a story from each, and then ranked them. And if I remember, I think Night at the Fiestas came in at number 2. And was one that I did want to add to my collection. So eventually I did a few years ago, and I've reread the collection since, or read the collection since. And it's okay. I mean, I like quite a number of the short stories in here, and some of them aren't as good. Or okay. But one of the short stories in that collection later became the novel The Five Wounds, which is Quaid's debut novel. So this takes the basic idea of the original short story and expands it out. Now, rather than a novelization of the short story, the short story's storyline is at the very beginning, and it expands out from there. I've tried this novel a few times and haven't really gotten on with it. City of Night by John Ritchie. This is a classic gay novel. It's about a male hustler who travels between New York, Los Angeles, New Orleans, and a number of other cities in between, and has a number of encounters with Johns. It's been quite a while since I read this novel. I read it in college. Back to Poetry with Pocket Universe by Nancy Reddy. This is a really good collection. I quite enjoyed it. And it's from LSU. From Omnidon is Vanishing Point by Kimberly Reyes. This collection I'm not as fond of. Didn't quite work out for me. Next is Selected Poems, 1950 to 2012 by Adrienne Rich. I have struggled with Rich's poetry in the past, but when I read this collection, I quite enjoyed it. I'm happy to have it. Scaffolding by Elena Rivera. This is part of the Princeton series of contemporary poets from Princeton University Press. It's really good. It's been a while since I reread it, but I quite liked it. Empire Falls by Richard Russo. This won the Pulitzer Prize in, I think, 2001 or 2002. It's about a small town in upstate New York that's on hard times. Didn't really make it all that far. My mom enjoyed this book a lot more than I did. I made it about maybe 2 or 3 chapters in, and she read the whole book. I will, sometimes in the past, I will, if my mom's run out of books, try to find something in my collection that she would like, although we have very, very different tastes. Back to poetry with I Thought There Would Be More Wolves by Sarah Ryan. This is from the University of Alaska Press. I think it's distributed by the University of Chicago. It's nature poetry. I like it, but it's not a favorite of mine. I also have a collection of Sappho's fragments translated by Mary Bernard. Sappho was a major Greek poet whose work has largely survived in fragments. I've had that collection in my collection for probably almost 30 years now. This is the collected poems of George Safaris, which is out from Princeton University Press. Of course, part of the Lockhart Library of Poetry and Translation. I'm thinking there might be a new revised edition of this. Really enjoyed this collection. I read it 2 or 3 years ago. No, about 3 or 4 years ago. Really liked it. So the last two collections on this shelf are by Diane Seuss. First up is Frank Sonnets, which won the Pulitzer Prize not last year but the year before, and is a really good book. I quite liked it. Her more recent collection is Modern Poetry, which came out last year and was up for the National Book Award, although it did not win. And also, a really good collection. So that was the penultimate shelf of classics, canonical, modern, and contemporary fiction, poetry, and drama. I will be back tomorrow with the final shelf and a little bit of a third shelf. But there aren't that many books to really warrant kind of a going into Tuesday. So I'm going to try to wrap up classics, canonical, modern, and contemporary fiction, poetry, and drama tomorrow, Monday. Although if the video gets a little long, then I might go into another one. But we shall see. Anyway, BookTube until I see you tomorrow. Thank you. Have a great afternoon and stay safe.